Welcome to lecture 17 of week 4 of BHU SWAYAM course titled Aspects of Cultural Studies. I am Dr. Dhriti Ray Dalai, professor at the Department of English, Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hindu University, the co-instructor of this course along with Professor Dalai. Now, in the previous lecture, I had tried to introduce the emerging field of animal studies and how cultural studies is grappling with this possibility of including species as a category of identity along with class, race, gender, sexuality, and disability. The current lecture is going to throw light on the field of animal studies as operative in India. And we will note that it lags behind its Western counterparts in glaring ways. The lecture will also seek to unravel how our lifestyle and thoughts of the animal is shaped by our cultures, the conflicting attitudes towards the animal, at times utilitarian, at times aggressive, at other times reverential, are a reflection of the diverse and multicultural strains impacting the land over time. Hopefully, the lecture will compel the listeners to rethink on the human-animal relationship and pave the way for sustainable development of all of Earth's creations. I have on the screen the nature of South Asian scholarship, modern South Asian scholarship on the human-animal interface depicted. So if you look at the agrarian historians and the work of Lakshman D. Satya, where he analyzes the catastrophic impact of colonial onslaught on several regional Indian cattle cultures and rural ecology. Then you have the work of Marvin Harris, who investigates the animal sacredness through the study of symbolism. Very, very importantly, from the subaltern studies group, you have someone like Gyanendra Pandey, rallying round the cow, and he undertakes an examination of the relationship between the cow, the community, and religious mobilization. Now, the cow was obviously without any agency of its own, but instrumental in feeding into communal strives. So what we notice here is that these studies are all structured in the anthropocentric mold with the non-human animal almost relegated to the margin. So the agency of the non-human animal is completely lost. In the field of imperial history, we have works like that of Rohan Deb Roy, Pratik Chakraborty, and Saurav Mishra. Now, Saurav Mishra's work traces the social history of cattle in India through the lens of veterinary medicine. Pratik Chakraborty brings in laboratory medicine and its rise and popularity in colonial India. And Rohan Deb Roy has unearthed in his study how imperialism worked to erase not only the human subaltern, but the animal groups from historical records. In the field of environmental ethics, there are studies by Mahesh Rangarajan, John Mackenzie, M.S.S. Pandian, K. Shivaramakrishnan, Julie Hughes, and others, obviously, where they are looking at the histories of animals in the wilderness. They're interrogating the politics of big game hunting. They're exploring the entry of wild carnivores into the colonial systems of classification. But Shomiparna Samanto, in her book Meat, Mercy and Morality, with its focus on colonial Bengal, asks a very pertinent question, that the reverential treatment of cows or the conservation of wild tigers after the destructions brought on by rampant hunting, they do not actually tell us the whole story of non-human animals in India. And the irony is not lost that it is a country where animals are almost ubiquitous in both the rural countryside as well as the urban spaces. Till now, I have given you examples from diverse historiographical traditions, the history of science, veterinary science, medicine, environmental history, urban history. But there is a glaring oversight, there is an omission in critical discourse. And I bring in the work of Fabrizio M. Ferrari and Thomas Danhart, who argue that animals in South Asia are doubly marginalized, both within the field of South Asian studies that continue to be anthropomorphic, as well as within animal studies that remain focused on non-humans in Europe and North America. So animals in South Asia and animals in South Asia studies, we note that there is a lot of scope for research and understanding how we have to attempt to center animals in South Asian scholarship. We have to write and find entangled narratives of humans and non-humans, especially from the Indian subcontinent. Shomiparna Samanto also identifies a dearth in a sense that contemporary South Asian scholarship is relatively silent on the importance of studying domesticated animals as historical subjects. So the focus should not just be on the megafauna, but focus should also be on the non-human animals that are in the domestic sphere. We note a curious absence and a disconnect. Now, the absence is that there has not been any systematic study in India when it comes to the history of thoughts and theories regarding animals, which is associated with general cultural attitudes, according to Anuradha Roy. The disconnect that I was referring to is this, that between the widespread, if not rampant and persistent animal abuse in the scientific sphere in India, there is also this rich and deeply developed cultural and religious sensibility, which is based upon the notion of ahimsa paramo dharma. That is, supreme righteousness consists in non-violence. There are shifting meanings associated with the animal in Hinduism. And the animal, or that the category of the animal, it conveys shifting meanings in Hindu mythological discourses. These examples that I am going to give you are known to all of us, and they demonstrate how the boundaries between animals and humans are ever oscillating. We have gods born as animals. We all know about Narasimha, the fourth avatar of Vishnu, who was incarnated as part lion and as part man. There is another avatar of Vishnu, the fish avatar of Vishnu, the Matsya. The dividing line between different animals are equally blurred, with animals like monkey, elephant, and snake associated respectively with Hanuman, Ganesh, and Nag, and also fish. And you find they're deified in Hinduism and elevated onto a high reverential podium than others. It is also not lost on us that there are so many species of animals operating as vahanas of our gods and goddesses. So the symbolic religious values, snakes as emblems of fertility, lions associated with Ma Durga, rats being sacred to the clan of Karni Mata, and obviously he is also the riding animal for Ganesh. This leads us on to understanding how there is a break or a divide between the understanding of animals in the West vis-a-vis its understanding in the East. In the South Asian context, animals with their sacred attributes and cultural diversities differ significantly from the Western understanding of them as a flat and blanket category. The laws of Manu are crucial for us in a sense. They expose and reveal the perception of the animal in Vedic society. Now, in Vedic ontology, Manu Dharma Shastras, they list 5 yagyas or sacrifices to be performed by every householder. Now, the 4th yagya, or homage to beings, advocates providing food offerings for animals, birds, insects, almost indicative of a concern for the non-human animals. And this also you will find in striking difference from the Judeo-Christian belief system when I talk about the acceptance of the non-human animal in the Indian context as possessing Atma. So to Manu, even animals possessed Atma and shared with the human similar physical activities and impulses like food, sleep, and fear. Here also you may refer back to the previous lecture where I have talked about Derrida's notion of finitude and how finitude through, weakness and vulnerability and death equates the human and the non-human. So there are no such striking differences to be identified. Rather, the need of the hour is to look at and locate the similarities. Scholars have also interpreted Manu as holding that even plants and animals have consciousness and experience happiness and unhappiness. From Manu's laws, if we move on to the Jain canon, it is the Acharanga Sutra, the oldest text, which offers us one very vital indication of the similar reverence for all living beings. And here I am referring to the study of Christopher Lee Chappell in his book, Non-Violence to Animals, Earth and Self in Asian Traditions. Now, there is a description of a particular scene where Lord Mahavir is being anointed for his decision to renounce the world. And this scene is inclusive of Mahavir and other non-human animals. So there is a palanquin which is being decorated, and on that palanquin, the decoration contains motifs of various non-human animals as well. So there would be pictures of wolves, bulls, horses, dolphins, lions, birds, etc. So ahimsa emerges as the fundamental ethic requiring a respect for all living forms. And it figures among the rules to be performed by all castes, along with truthfulness, non-stealing, purity, control of senses. There are 3 injunctions on meat eating, that, meat should be obtained only through ritual sacrifice. You should rather not eat meat if possible. And if at all there is going to be animal sacrifice, it has to be part of the sacrificial process. If you look at Mahabharata, then you notice that there is also an attestation of the significance of non-violence. And I'm quoting, that meat of other animals is like the flesh of one's son. That foolish person stupefied by folly who eats meat is regarded as the vilest of human beings. Wendy Doniger's study of the Hindus suggests that ahimsa or non-violence in the Vedas not only applied to relationships between humans alone, but to relationships between humans and animals. I fall back on Anuradha Roy once again, where she suggests that the idea that man is not separate from the animal world and that we are all integral parts of an organic whole is manifest. Moreover, it is one's action or karma that determines whether men and animals go up or down in the cycle of rebirth until they achieve moksha or liberation. Now, this much so for ahimsa, but the fundamental problem with the question of animals in the classical Indian past is that, yes, they accept animals in possession of Atma. Yes, they accept that animals can feel happiness and sadness. Yes, there should be a following of the principle and ethics of ahimsa and non-violence towards the non-human animal. But, like in the Western world of philosophical tradition, there is a concept like the great chain of being applicable to the Indian society as well. So the traditional Hindu worldview, humans and animals placed hierarchically. So animals are placed at a lower order. And the animals are associated with a wide range of negative qualities like ignorance, inability to reason, lack of intelligence, greed, cruelty, and atheism. So this brings us to the fundamental oppositional impulses that we identify on the question of the animal. Rig Veda makes a link between ritual actions and assured benefits. And if you are to achieve those assured benefits, it has to be through animal sacrifice. Mahabharata advocates sacrifice of 7 wild animals and even some domestic animals like goats, rams, bulls, mules, which conflicts with the advocacy of non-violence or harmlessness. And this is Bal Gangadhar Tilak's translation of the term ahimsa towards animals. So we note that Vedic thought was caught between 2 opposing acts of performing animal sacrifice and espousing ahimsa. The Mahabharata also seems to be non-committal with violence and non-violence as it prescribes both. Thus, it is obvious for us that classical Hinduism was not a safe haven for non-humans as they were perceived a lower form of life. From the Vedas to the Mahabharatas, we move now to the world of empires and emperors. And the first example that I have brought in is the Emperor Ashoka, who not only converted to Buddhism, but established several laws that required kind treatment to animals. Now, these included restricting meat consumption, curtailing hunting, establishing hospitals, and roadside watering stations for animals. You know, later on we will identify goshalas, then you have pinjra-pole. So you notice how there is a partial assertion of animal rights, and it is highly unusual in the sense that on the part of a temporal ruler who is given to authority, who's given to power, who is given to, you know, extension of control and domination and dominion, would be concerned with animal rights. But again, you note that Ashoka would neither ban capital punishment nor prohibit killing of animals for meat. So from Ashoka, we move to another example from history, that is Akbar. And according to Akbarnama, and obviously this is, you know, under Jain influence, he passed laws requiring the protection of mice, oxen, monkeys, roosters, fish, serpents, etc. And like I was telling you about the animal hospitals or the pinjra-poles, where, you know, effort and money was spent on animals, very, very importantly, that were past their usefulness. So going beyond the utilitarian approach in a way. So is this because of the extraordinary levels of charity as found in India? There were also goshalas or cow homes and animal homes for aging and enfeebled cattle, and you can date it to the 16th century. So if you have to sum up, the classical Hindu attitude towards non-human animals is not a monolithic one. Rather, it is immensely complex and often antithetical. The Sanskritic orthodoxy of Brahmins rested on a narrow anthropocentric view of the world. They conceptualized the non-human animals as lower forms of existence and easily, sacrificable. And the text also articulated a vision of universal empathy. So you note a wavering tension between apathy and empathy. Now, this is a point in the lecture where we focus on the colonial intervention, and my thrust is on the colonial presence in Bengal because of the intricate, intimate interactions between the Bengal province and the colonizers. So if we can identify and understand the response of the Bengal province to the animal question as symptomatic of the response of other parts of colonized India. Now, British Raj's preoccupation was quite known with plants and animals. But there was a conflict between the material culture of British India and the subject race's religious and ritualistic reverence for animals. Scholars have identified that the colonizers' debates on the non-human were not much motivated by protectionism, but they were reflective of the microcosm that existed and involved class and race anxieties. So there was no collective action towards eliminating violence against animals. The civilizing mission wanted to perpetuate the image of the progressive home, that is England, as against the savage and barbaric colony, that is India. And all the Indians were barbaric and savage, and so was their treatment of the non-human animal. The British constantly tried to control, subjugate, discipline not only the human subaltern, but also the non-human subalterns. Interestingly, there were few 19th century anti-cruelty legislations, and it is the Calcutta Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, established in 1862, which saw a prize essay titled Duty and Advances of Kindness to Animals, asking for a better treatment of all animals as God's creations. But the irony is not lost on us that they were seeking to protect those animals that were of use and value to the colony. So they were aiming to protect and preserve draft animals and large meat-producing cattle more than dogs and cats. You also have the 1869 Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and the utilitarian character is again manifest, that it did not cover use of animals in research and those used by the British for sport. And we know how the Britishers would engage in shikar. Underlying the class anxieties and tensions, you find a zamindar, Rai Issar Chandra Mittar Bahadur, pleading with the magistrates to punish the lower class Bengalis because the spread of cruelty to animals was strongest amongst the lower parts of the people who had not had access to education. So they could only be reprimanded and they could only be deterred by pains and penalties of law. Interestingly, you have the setting up of the Belgachia Veterinary College and Hospital in 1896. And this is the place where Vedic compassion for animals would meet Western veterinary science. So link of humanitarianism with science. Now, up till the 19th century, the colonized and especially the Bengali Bhadralok were attempting to hold on to the notion of kindness towards animals as a part of that glorious national, specifically Vedic tradition. But when the Bengali Bhadralok came into contact with the colonizers, and when the Europeans questioned the lack of manliness of the Bengali, so the Bengali was the effeminate Bengali, there was this need now to embrace meat eating. So the Bengali Bhadralok had to start eating meat to counter the colonizers' charges of effeminacy. You also have Henry Derozio getting sacked from the Hindu College because he had not only eaten beef, but had also inspired his followers to do so. But here, beef eating is taken to be an attempt to ridicule socio-cultural traditions as defiance of the religious rites and an act of rebellion. But not all Bengalis would subscribe to meat eating, and there were medical practitioners who would rather counter this drive for meat eating by suggesting that it is against, pravritti of the human to consume non-human meat. And this is Akshay Kumar Dutt, who is considered as a pioneer of modern scientific thinking in Bengal. And he claimed that meat eating was not only against Hindu dharma, but also human pravritti. Again, we are stunned by this ambivalence. That on one hand, you have ahimsa, the Vedic tradition to uphold, and on the other hand, you have this injunction to eat or consume meat. So if you have legislations being drafted and finalized for animal welfare, you would also notice that there was an increasing number of, animals being slaughtered. There was a mushrooming of slaughterhouses in and around Calcutta. And even in the Belgachia hospital, veterinary hospital, there was a hierarchy of sorts in the treatment of animals. That draft animals were treated first over other domesticated animals. So we understand and identify selective benevolence. When it comes to game hunting, we not only associate game hunting with, power and masculinity, because it was, after all, an elite sport where you have defined kings, British administrators, royal peers, traditional rulers, all engaging in shikar. That's organized big game hunting. And this hunting would, this organized hunting would contribute to a massive dwindling of animals and the numbers in India, so much so that now you have to have conservation acts in place. But literature from the 1870s to the 1940s document how rural Indian villagers resisted the hunting activities of British and other sportsmen. So they would relate, these rural Indians would, have symbolic associations between animals and their religious deities, and they would want to stop this indiscriminate killing. Mahesh Rangarajan, an important voice from India on animal rights, talks about how the cheetah has, infamously become the only mammal to become extinct in India after independence. And he is quite apprehensive of the fact whether it was the last to vanish or merely the first. This brings us to that one important individual who engages with the animal question, and that is the father of the nation, Bapu. And you note how he was against vivisection. I have already explained to you vivisection, which is the use of animals in scientific experiments, and that too in a condition when they are alive. So he had abhorred vivisection. He was against religious animal sacrifice. He chose vegetarianism as a part of his personal truth. And he was conscious of the animal's ability to suffer, and it formed the foundation of his notion of ahimsa. And the only way we can criticize Gandhi's legacy is when we realize that he is extending ahimsa to animals on the basis of his moral perception of man, which was anthropocentric. So man, according to Gandhi, held a higher place than non-human animals, and man's greatness rested in the ability to rise above nature's bloody competition and to compassionately care for lesser creatures. Derrida's argument, I keep going back to Derrida, argument stressed on shared similarities between the human and the non-human, whereas Gandhi's was on differences. So the utilitarian perspective is also there in Gandhi, because at times he would justify killing, of the non-human animal only when they posed a threat to man. So you could justify discrimination in terms of man's faculty of reason, which was absent in monkeys. So these are few pieces of legislation coming from India. So the draft animal welfare of 2011, there is an 1860 Indian Penal Code which makes it illegal to kill, poison, maim, or render useless animals. Of the animal welfare organizations, you have People for Animals, the Blue Cross of India, Sanjay Gandhi Animal Care Center, another name which is almost synonymous with the animal welfare project in India is that of Maneka Gandhi. So all of these charities or welfare organizations could be invoking the traditional principle of ahimsa. But the fact remains that animal testing, that too unregulated, is the reality. Now, I fall back on a report submitted by S. Chinni Krishna on the 50 years of the CPCSEA 1963-2012, and this is the Committee for the Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments on Animals. And you find a similar kind of apathy, apathy in the sense that too from the government. And I'm quoting, "Sadly, the lack of enforcement makes a mockery of our laws. A large number of our government laboratories are not registered with the CPCSEA, even after 14 years of passage. Private laboratories may, have good standards, but the state of animal houses in even leading educational institutes and government laboratories would fail even the most basic requirements in many cases." So with this, we come to the conclusion of the lecture that the human society of the East may not stand very different from the Western counterpart, with some cultural differences. Despite calls of ahimsa, there is indifference and cruelty dominating the Indian reality. None of the various strands of animal studies, be it, human animal studies, critical animal studies, has the answer to the animal question in India. And probably there is no single ideal solution in a land of such bewildering cultural diversity. So we have to fall back on goodwill, education, a vibrant democracy, stringent laws, and an overhauling of our cultural apathy towards animals if we have to imagine a better, inclusive world. We have to accept responsibility for living in general. Only then human-animal relationships will change for the better. These are some of the references for your perusal, from Mahesh Rangarajan to Lance Nelson, Christopher Key Chappell, Shomiporna Shamanto, as well as Anuradha Roy. So with this, we come to the end of this lecture on animal studies, especially focusing on the Indian scenario. Thank you.